My name is Daniel Foster, and when I was 8 years old, my childhood ended in the most terrifying way imaginable. What happened to me inside that yellow-walled bedroom is something I've never been able to forget. Most children grow up fearing the dark, but I learned quickly that the dark was never empty. It was watching me, it was waiting for me, and it followed me long after I left that house. I used to think my childhood home was safe, a place where nothing bad could ever reach me. The walls were painted a soft yellow, my bed tucked neatly into the corner, and my favorite stuffed bear sat on the shelf above me. When I was 8 years old, I didn't have many worries. I believed in the kind of innocence that only children can hold on to. The kind that makes you think nothing in the dark could hurt you as long as you stayed under your blanket. But that illusion didn't last very long. I remember the first night when the strange feeling began. It wasn't anything obvious. There was no sudden noise, no flickering light, no storm outside. It was just an ordinary evening. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching how the street lamp outside my window cast shadows through the tree branches. I had seen those shadows 100 times before. They always swayed back and forth with the wind, stretching across my ceiling like crooked fingers. But this time, they moved differently. At first I thought it was my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. The branches swayed to the left, but one shadow stayed behind. It clung to the corner of the room, dark and heavy, not shifting with the others. My eyes locked on it, waiting for it to dissolve. But it didn't. It was still there, sharp against the wall, shaped almost like something hunched over, as if it had shoulders and a head tilted slightly to the side. A strange chill crawled over me, and I pulled the blanket tighter around my body. I told myself it was nothing, just a tired brain playing tricks, but even under the blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My chest tightened, and I became hyper-aware of every sound in the house, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, the creak of the wood settling. It was as though the quiet itself was waiting for something to happen. I closed my eyes, hoping that if I didn't look at it, the shadow would disappear. But the longer I lay there, the more convinced I became that it was still there, standing in the corner, watching me. I couldn't see its eyes if it even had any, but I could feel the weight of its attention. It pressed against me like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to scream for my parents, but my body refused to move. I was frozen, paralyzed by a fear I didn't understand. I stayed that way for hours, my small body curled up beneath the covers, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid it might give me away. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. When morning finally came, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and everything looked ordinary again. My room was just my room, the walls the same soft yellow, the tree outside casting familiar shadows across the floor. The corner was empty, as though nothing had been there at all. I told myself it must have been a dream, a trick of my imagination. That's what children do, right? We invent monsters where there are none. I almost believed it. But that night, when the world grew quiet again and the shadows returned, I looked up at the ceiling and froze. It was there again. The same shadow, lingering in the same corner, unmoved by the tree outside. Only this time it wasn't where I had first seen it. It had shifted, inching closer to my bed. The branches outside swayed and twisted, their shadows sliding across the walls, but this one remained perfectly still. I couldn't deny it anymore. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't being cast by anything in my room. It was something else, something that didn't belong. And it was inside with me. I told myself over and over that it had to be some kind of illusion. Maybe a shadow from something in my room. Maybe even a trick my mind kept playing. But the more I stared, the less it felt like an illusion. Night after night, the same shape was there, fixed in the same corner of my room. A solid patch of darkness that didn't fade when the lights shifted. What unsettled me the most was how it seemed closer than before. The first time, it was across the room. Now it was only a few feet away from my bed, and I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The outline wasn't smooth, its shoulders were jagged, and its head looked as though it hung at a broken angle. Every part of me wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I buried myself under the covers, desperate for safety. Yet even with the blanket pulled tight, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was moving. It wasn't the kind of fear where you imagine something terrible. It was the kind of fear where you know something is happening, whether you want to admit it or not. The weight of its presence pressed against me, heavy, suffocating. My body was trembling, though I didn't want to move a muscle. I remember daring myself to peek. I told myself I'd only look for a second, that if I saw nothing unusual, maybe I could finally rest. I pulled the blanket back just enough to see, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness of the room. The shadow was closer than ever. It was no longer in the corner. It had stretched across the floor, thin and unnatural, its shape flickering like a candle flame that couldn't go out. Its head twitched slowly, as if straining to turn toward me, though there were no features, no eyes, no mouth, just the impression of a figure. I couldn't look away. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain it could hear it. I felt as though the air itself had thickened, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. I thought if I could stay still, if I didn't draw attention to myself, maybe it would retreat back into the dark corner where it belonged. But it didn't. It stayed there, flickering, twitching, always closer. At some point during the night, I must have blacked out, because I woke up with the first light of dawn creeping through the curtains. My body ached as if I hadn't slept at all. For a brief moment, I convinced myself that I had dreamed it, that none of it had been real. I almost believed it until I swung my legs off the bed and froze. There, on the wooden floor beneath me were faint marks in the dust, small prints, handprints. They started in the corner of the room where the shadow had been, and led directly to my bed. They weren't like normal handprints either. Some looked like the hands of a child, small and delicate. Others were too big, with fingers stretched unnaturally long, pressing deep into the dust as though they were clawing their way closer to me. I sat there, staring at them, my throat dry, my body locked in place. The longer I looked, the more details I noticed. The small prints overlapped with the larger ones, layered on top of each other like they had been made at different times. It wasn't just one shadow, it wasn't just one thing. There were many. The marks didn't stop at my bed. I saw faint smudges along the edge of my sheets. Small streaks that suggested something had touched the fabric, brushed against it, or maybe even climbed up. I yanked my legs back onto the mattress, curling them tightly beneath me, as though that could somehow protect me from what had already been there. The whole day passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything. Every corner of the house seemed darker than it should have been. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something just out of sight. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. How do you explain something like that without sounding insane? I told myself again and again that I was imagining it, that the handprints were just dust shifting naturally. But deep down I knew the truth. That night, when I climbed back into bed, I tried not to look. I told myself I would keep my eyes shut, that if I didn't see it, it couldn't hurt me. But as soon as the lights went out, I felt it. The room grew heavier, colder. The air thickened in my lungs, and even with my eyes squeezed shut, I could sense it hovering nearby, closer than ever, waiting for me to notice it again. I buried myself beneath the covers, praying for morning to come quickly. But no matter how tightly I clung to the blanket, I couldn't block out the image of those handprints. They weren't just reminders of what I saw, they were proof that something had been in my room with me. And I couldn't shake the thought that tonight, it would come closer still. The handprints didn't stop after that night. They multiplied. At first it was just a trail from the corner to the bed, but within days they appeared in new places, spread across the wooden floor in strange, overlapping patterns. Sometimes they were so small they looked like the hands of a toddler, and other times they were enormous, fingers stretched unnaturally long, curling inward as though gripping the ground. I would wake up and see fresh prints near the closet, under the window, even by the door. Each night they seemed to appear closer to where I slept, closing in on me like a circle, tightening little by little. The strangest part was that they never appeared while I was awake. I tried to stay up all night once, staring at the floor with a blanket pulled to my chin, but the room was silent, still, and empty. I must have drifted off at some point, because when I woke there were new handprints smeared in the dust right by my bed frame. Some of them pointed inward, toward me, as if whatever made them had been kneeling by the mattress, reaching up toward where I lay. It wasn't only the prints anymore. I began to hear things at night. At first it was faint, almost easy to dismiss a creak in the wall, the groan of wood settling, but then it changed. It became slower, deliberate, breathing, not my own. It was low and heavy, dragging in and out, like someone crouched close beside me, listening to every shaky inhale I took. I would lie there frozen, barely daring to move, my heart racing so hard I was sure it would give me away. The breathing would grow louder as the night stretched on, until it felt like it was inches from my ear, even though nothing was there when I opened my eyes. Morning became my only comfort, but even then I wasn't free of it. Strange things began happening in the daylight too. One morning I woke to find my stuffed bear on the floor. I must have knocked it off in my sleep, I thought, until I picked it up. Its head was twisted all the way around, facing the wrong direction. The seams of its neck looked stretched, pulled too far. I dropped it instantly, my stomach lurching, because I knew I hadn't done that. The smell came next. At first it was faint, an earthy dampness clinging to the corners of the room. No matter how many times the window was opened, the scent returned. It grew stronger over time until it seeped into my sheets, my clothes, even the carpet beneath my bed. It was the smell of dirt, heavy and wet, as though someone had been digging deep underground and tracked the soil in with them. Every breath filled my lungs with a scent, making it impossible to ignore. The nights grew worse. I started keeping my eyes shut, refusing to look at anything in the room once the lights were out. But keeping them shut didn't help. The presence was still there, heavier than ever. I felt the pressure of it at the edge of my bed, like weight gathering in the mattress springs. At first it was only faint, a dip as though something had leaned against the side. Then one night, it changed. The mattress sank beneath me, not slightly, not a trick of shifting blankets, but heavily, as though someone had climbed onto it. I didn't dare open my eyes. My body locked up, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my fingers went numb. The dip grew deeper, closer. I could feel it pressing against the mattress, inching toward me. The air grew cold, and with each second the smell of damp earth became suffocating, wrapping around me like a shroud. I stayed like that until morning, my body trembling beneath the blanket. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the indentation was still there. The sheets were wrinkled, pressed down in a shape that looked far too much like knees and hands. That was when I realized it wasn't just watching me anymore, it had started climbing in. I no longer thought of sleep as rest. Every night felt like a battle, every hour an eternity of waiting for the weight on the mattress, the breathing in the dark, the smell of damp earth that clung to me even when I pressed my face deep into the pillow. What terrified me most wasn't the nights anymore. It was the mornings, because I never knew what I would find when the sun returned. The nightmares began slowly, blending into what was already happening, until I couldn't separate dream from reality. I would dream of narrow corridors, walls pressing closer on each side, making it harder to breathe with every step I took. I would dream of laughter, high-pitched and cruel, echoing from behind me even though I was always alone. Sometimes I dreamed of opening my closet door and finding nothing inside, no clothes, no floor, no back wall, only a swallowing blackness that stretched forever, pulling me in with a force I couldn't resist. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, only to realize the air in my room was just as heavy and suffocating as the air in the dream. What unsettled me more were the times I wasn't sure if I had woken at all. I would sit up in bed and see my room, but something was always wrong. The walls looked too long, the corners darker than they should have been, the door further away than I remembered. Sometimes I would see the shadow standing in the corner, twitching like before, only to blink and realize I was still lying down. My eyes never opened in the first place. The line between sleep and waking blurred, until I couldn't trust what I was seeing, and that made it even worse. One morning I woke to find dirt scattered across my bed. Not just a trace of dust, but clumps of damp soil, dark and heavy, staining the sheets. My fingernails were black, caked with the same mud, as if I had been digging all night. I scrubbed them clean, but the smell lingered on my skin. I hadn't left my room, I hadn't gone outside. So where had I been? It followed me into the day. I saw it reflected in the bathroom mirror, a flicker of movement behind me, gone before I could turn. I caught glimpses of it in the hallway, slipping past the doorway out of the corner of my eye. The scratching began soon after, faint at first, a light scrape inside the walls. But it grew louder, clearer, as if something was digging its way through the plaster, tunneling closer with each passing night. My parents never mentioned it. Maybe they couldn't hear it. Maybe it was only for me. I started dreading even being in my room, but I had nowhere else to go. Every night I pulled the blanket tighter, curled into myself, and tried to pretend the mattress didn't shift beneath me. Tried to pretend the breathing wasn't there. But pretending did nothing. It always returned. And then came the writing. It was the night I woke with the sudden sense of being watched more closely than ever. My room was silent, but too silent, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing. I turned my head toward the door, and it was open. I never slept with it open. The air felt colder than it should have, a draft brushing across my face, carrying the thick stench of soil. My stomach twisted as I looked down at the floor. Words were traced into the dust, not with a finger, but with something sharper, dragging slow lines across the wood. For words, crooked and jagged, written in a hand that trembled yet pressed too deep to be human, let me in. The letters stretched almost the entire length of the doorway. My eyes burned from staring, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't dealing with something that simply wanted to watch. It wanted more. It had been patient, waiting in corners and shadows, inching closer night after night, but it was no longer satisfied. It wanted entry, it wanted me. I didn't move until morning. The words were gone by then, the dust smooth as if no one had ever touched it. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what it asked, and I was terrified of the night to come, because I didn't know how much longer I could keep it out. I told myself that I could endure it, that if I stayed strong enough it couldn't touch me. I thought if I kept the blanket pulled over my head, if I never looked, if I ignored the sounds, it would eventually grow tired of waiting. But each night, it only grew bolder. The scratching inside the walls turned into pounding. The soft dip in the mattress became a deep weight that pressed against my body. The smell of damp earth no longer came in faint traces, it filled the entire room, suffocating me until I gagged against it. I knew then that it wasn't outside anymore. It was already here, and I had no choice but to face it. The final night began in silence, a silence so unnatural that it hollowed out the air, swallowing the familiar creaks and ticks of the house. I woke suddenly, my eyes snapping open to darkness thicker than usual, as though the night itself had seeped into my room. My chest felt heavy, and my limbs ached as if something had drained the strength from them. At first, I thought it was just another night of waiting, another night of shadows shifting in the corner. But then I realized this time there were no shadows at all. The corner was empty. The floor was clear. Even the air felt different. For a moment, relief washed over me, fragile and uncertain. Maybe it had left. Maybe it had finally given up. I almost let myself believe it. Then the mattress dipped. This time it wasn't a slow shift or a faint weight. It sank hard, the springs groaning beneath the pressure of something far heavier than me. The bed tilted slightly, my body sliding toward the dip, my breath caught in my throat, and every muscle screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. It was like my body wasn't my own anymore. I felt the blanket pull tight against my skin, as though invisible hands had pressed down on it, pinning me in place. The breathing began again, louder than ever, each inhale rattling like a hollow chest struggling to fill itself. The sound was right beside me, close enough that I could feel the air shift against my cheek. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a strangled whimper. My eyes burned with tears as I realized there was no escaping it now. I had invited it in the moment I acknowledged it, the moment I gave it my attention. I dared to open my eyes. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It had form. Its limbs were stretched and wronged, bending in jagged angles as it loomed over me. Its skin looked stretched too tightly across its body, paper-thin, like it would tear if it moved too quickly. Where a face should have been was smooth and blank, but I could see the faint impression of a mouth, twitching and moving as if whispering words I couldn't hear. The twitching grew faster, more violent, until the indent pulsed like something pressing from inside, desperate to speak. I realized then that the handprints weren't from it reaching toward me. They were from me reaching for it. Each night, in my sleep, I had called to it, pulled it closer, dragged it into my room without knowing. The dirt on my bed, the soil under my nails, all of it was proof. I hadn't just been a victim, I had been helping it find its way in. The mattress dipped again, harder, as it leaned closer. The stench of earth and rot filled my lungs until I was choking on it. The twitching of its mouth stopped suddenly, and I felt a sharp press of weight against my chest, cold and suffocating. My vision blurred, darkness swallowing everything around me. I don't remember what happened after that. I only remember waking up somewhere else. My family told me we moved out of that house because of plumbing problems, but I never saw anyone pack our things. I never saw anyone carry boxes or drive a truck. One night I went to bed in that room, and the next thing I remember, I was waking in a different house, my parents smiling like nothing had happened. They never spoke of it again, but I know the truth. The house didn't let me go. The thing didn't let me go, because even now, years later, I'll be lying in bed and feel the faint dip in the mattress beside me. I'll smell the damp earth lingering in the air. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel a cold hand covering mine, guiding it down toward the floor, dragging invisible fingers into the dust. Every time I wake, I check, and every time, there are new handprints leading from my bed to the corner. It didn't stay in that house. It stayed with me.